Hey Warlocks. I knew you guys have always been a little fruity, and in all honesty, I think you've been well overdue an ability that really just dominates your enemies. With this build, you're just sucking around. Just sucking and fucking. Sorry. Jokes aside, this is a really cool melee build that's very interaction heavy, flexible with exotic armors and aspects, so room to switch up to what you like. But the best thing behind it, it's got a real thematic power fantasy, with just the animation of Soul Siphon being one of the coolest in the game. It's not often Warlocks get melee builds, but when they do, and it performs as well as these do, puts a stupid grin on my face. I know this is a build that's probably been talked about a lot by now by the time this video comes out, but it's too cool to not talk about. So without further ado, the SUCKLOCK. Here's a quick build. Aspects are Soul Siphon, then if you're using Winter's Guile, you're taking Feed the Void, and if you're using Nezarac's Sin, you're using Child of the Old Gods. Then Pocket Singularity, Grenade is flexible, although with Nezarac's take Suppressor Grenade, then Healing Rift. For Fragments, if you go Winter's Guile, take Persistence, Instability, Exchange, Expulsion, Obscurity. And if you go Nezarac's, go Persistence, Starvation, Domineering, Instability, Expulsion, Obscurity. Here's your mod setup. Super is flexible. Exotic armor, I feel like it's kind of obvious, it's either Nezarac's Sin or Winter's Guile. Exotic guns are flexible, but just in general, anything Void that has Repulsor Brace is really nice. Look for armor sets that build into Void, Melees, Grenade, or Damage Resist. Armor sets though are much more expanded in these build videos, getting their own full dedicated segment. I go much more in depth there. Your best artifacts are Encrypted Data Disk or Hunter's Journal. Take the Void related mods there. Right, let's talk Soul Siphon. This is the new aspect we've just received, and apart from being what's probably the coolest ability to see go off in game, it has a surprising amount of depth to it when you start bringing those two exotics into the build and playing into Soul Siphon's interactions with them. But for what this actually does, whenever you land a powered melee hit, you'll then get Soul Siphon ready for 20 seconds, and a new, free use melee ability that sits on top of Pocket Singularity. On using Soul Siphon, you'll start damaging all close enemies in front of you, and I really do mean all, there is no cap on how many enemies this can hit, and the longer Soul Siphon stays draining an enemy, the more the damage will ratchet up, starting relatively low and becoming pretty hard hitting once it reaches its max time of 2 seconds. Plus, whilst you drain enemies, you'll really quickly build up Void Overshield and get class ability energy back per enemy hit. Now everything I've just said, everything that Soul Siphon does at base is really powerful, but where you can start to push the strength of this aspect is through the fact that this counts as a melee. Whenever this lands hits and whenever this gets kills, through and through, it counts fully as a powered Void melee. Me seeing that in game, my brain jumped to so many exotics that play heavily into melee effects. You can use Fellwinters for chain weakening and disorient, Necrotics for poison chains and use it alongside something like Necrochasm, or even Karnstein's here for Devour and Restoration. These are all cool combos, just that Nezarac's and Winter's Guile stood out to me for being some really cool, more ability spam versions of Soul Siphon. And you can pretty cleanly put these two exotics into the niches that they fill. So if there's a playstyle that stands out to you more, you can go with that exotic. The whole thing really boils down to though, do you want to crowd control, or do you want big melee damage buffing? I've got to start with Winter's Guile, because when you get this to work, some of the things you can do with this exotic, it's disgusting at times from the damage it does, and the amount of Soul Siphons you can dish out. When you've got this on, any melee or glaive final blows give a stack of Warlord Sigil, with finishers giving 3 stacks, with those stacks lasting just under 5 seconds, and every stack giving you a melee damage boost that maxes out at 10 stacks. All of that scaling like this. You'll notice, and it very much plays in our favour, that the damage from these stacks is really front loaded. At 3, 4 and 5 stacks, you're already sitting at 166, 200 and 225% damage respectively. So it doesn't take much effort to get a really nice melee damage buff, which then makes chaining into even more melees even easier. Where we get spammy with abilities though is on hitting 10 stacks, you instantly get refunded a melee charge and get Warlord's Fury ready, and if you use that melee, whilst you've got that buff, you get some of the most ludicrous melee regen for 8 seconds. Genuinely, melees back faster than you can spend them. On top of the fact that whilst you're in this mode, your melee damage spikes up to a 400% damage increase. This mode is honestly like pseudo invincibility for 8 seconds, from Devour triggering or the Void Overshield, on top of the fact that coming out of this, you've used Soul Siphon so much that your class ability just gets a load of regen for what's essentially free. I could sit here and glaze Winter's Guile all day, and I will a little bit later too, but your other exotic Nezis has been really buffed up. This does everything it did before. You get void kills, you get bonus melee, grenade, class, and super regen rate, a 300% bonus for melee and grenade, and 200% for class and super. New to this though, and what makes it so attractive alongside Soul Siphon, is that whenever you kill suppressed enemies, or kill enemies with Soul Siphon, you get an extra 1.5 seconds of Abyssal Extractors, and the big one is that Soul Siphon will now suppress enemies on hit. Because enemies that get hit with suppression have the disorient effect applied to them, using Soul Siphon into a group of enemies basically just switches them off for 10 seconds. They don't do anything apart from stumble around, and as the melee can hit from a pretty good distance, it turns dangerous groups of enemies into just complete dum-dums that don't ever shoot back at you. This is also my reasoning behind the aspect picks here too. The nature of Winter's Guile being kill heavy means it really likes Feed the Void. You don't want other abilities to be stealing kills for your melee, but you do need kills in order to get its perk online, so Enhanced Devour's 140 HP heal is so appreciated, and you're able to get it online really quickly, from Soul Siphon being the trigger for activating Devour. Nezirax though, plays really well off Child of the Old Gods, as this has just got buffed, and will suppress on initially attaching to a target, which works dreamily with Nezirax's new perk. Literally, if this was to stick to 5 enemies, and you then kill them with void damage, that's max Abyssal Extractors time. On top of the fact that it's damage, weaken, and every 1.5 seconds it'll drip feed you 4% grenade and melee energy if it hits a target whilst using Healing Rift, which you always will be. Plus, it kind of refunds itself through any enemies dying under its draining field, giving you back class ability energy, and made even more spammy from Nezirax giving bonus class regen too. These aspect choices also influence your fragment list, as one of your builds needs a way to get Devour and the others just got it baked in. For fragments, if you go Winter's Guile, take Persistence, Instability, Exchange, Expulsion, Obscurity. And if you take Nezirax, go Persistence, Starvation, Domineering, Instability, Expulsion, Obscurity. For Winter's Guile, your fragment choices outside of Obscurity I really don't think are all that important. For Nezirax though, I think they are much more, and you'll see them actively show up in your gameplay a lot more too. For Nezirax, Starvation and Domineering is your Devour package. Starvation gives Devour for picking up an orb or a Void Breach, with our Void Breach maker being Domineering, where on killing a suppressed enemy, you make a breach, with the added benefit of suppressing enemies giving you 30 extra weapon stats and refilling your readied weapon. That refill part, if you use it right, is like having the best version of Demolitionist and Grave Robber just attached to all of your guns. Using your melee will refill your guns, Child attaching to enemies will refill your guns, and using Suppressor Grenade will too. That's the core parts of what make up the kits, so let's talk gameplay. Winter's Guile is the version you have to use in a much more specific way, and I genuinely think the best thing to do with this build is to play hard off those finishers. I know people will show this in Ultimate content, then go, this build's so overpowered, but the moment you hit GMs, Soul Siphon is nowhere near as reliable a killer as you might hope it to be. If you start just by going for melees, you might find you'll struggle to get stacks up high enough, and the last thing you want is to start losing stacks and not having a melee to use to get them back up. If you start with a finisher though, instantly 166% damage increase, and from that point melee kills become a breeze to get. You go finisher to get 3 stacks, pocket singularity, Soul Siphon, pocket, Siphon, and you'll probably just be at max stacks from that, and if an enemy has somehow survived that combo, odds are they're gonna be in finisher range, which is another 3 stacks. Then I've got to assume that you have Warlord's Fury, and then you just get 8 seconds of straight spam, and as Warlord's Fury ends, let Pocket Singularity fill back up to 2 charges, and then you go again. One thing you should be aware of is that Pocket Singularity will not build up underneath Soul Siphon. So if you end Warlord's Fury using Soul Siphon, you won't be coming out of that mode with 2 melee charges, which sucks. You really want to be starting off your combo at 2 charges, so do be aware of when that buff runs out and make sure you have 2 melee charges coming out of it. Nezarac's compared to Guile is a lot more simple. You drop a Rift, and like any good parent, you send your child in first. It'll suppress enemies, giving you Domineering's weapon stat bonuses, then you walk in and Soul Siphon them, and then they're CC'd again for another 10 seconds. It reminds me very much of Void Hunters that spam a lot of smokes, in that enemies just spend the entire time with their heads ducked in their hands, just plodding around. Difference being that you're sucking off enemies and hitting anime hand poses too. But from all the regen from Nezis and regen from Child, you get to keep enemies in timeout a lot. Obscurity is surprisingly good in that you can finish at an enemy, then straight out of Invis just suppress anything in front of you, which just makes the playstyle even safer. Now for your stats. With Nezarac's, I think the way to run this is with really high weapon stats, then spamming strong Void Special and Heavies. You won't run out of ammo, and it lets you keep Abyssal Extractor's time really high. Then get as close to 100 in melee, class, super, grenade as possible, with priority in that order. Guile though likes as high melee stats as possible. That doesn't mean ditching your other stats. Grenade, class, super and weapons are still really important, but where you can, push melee to 100 plus. For your mod setup, this build is one that's quite good at making orbs through Soul Siphon and Heavy Handed, plus having decently spammy class abilities, meaning you can also run Reaper. Through those orbs, you then have 3 ways to spend them, in either 1-2 finisher, special finisher, or by having them fuel font mods. If you go for finisher mods, you'll want a setup like this, and if you want font mods, take this. You can switch stuff around here, but these are good foundations to start with. Although I have to say, 1-2 finisher has really been my preference. It lets you use melees inefficiently with Guile, and suppress a load more enemies with Nezarac's. And on to the last bits. Armour sets. Normally, I like to test my armor sets, but there's so many that I think could work here that if I went out of my way to farm every role I wanted, this video would be coming out in like a month after when it actually has. So take these recommendations with a pinch of salt. I haven't playtested a lot of these, and because they're so new, Compendium doesn't have all the details either, but I can just imagine that they would be good here. So, Dark Age 4-piece for the healing aura, considering you siphon class energy off of enemies, EU Technology 2 and 4 for its ability to make void breaches and to make void weapons deal AoE on picking up breaches, Exodus Down 2 and 4 to interact with spending armor charges and giving DR, Crota's 2 and 4 for damage resist and curse thrall explosions on landing melee kills, Techian's Regalia 2 and 4 for damage resist and ability regen built up over time for landing kills or finishes, Veritas 2 and 4 in that it makes Void Moss, which gives you Void Overshield, which works nicely with Shield Crush and Singularity Blade. Although I honestly reckon the best of the bunch is Brute of Nightmares 2 and 4, which is literally just a free 20% damage resist whilst Devour is active. And lastly for your artifact, where I really do think Encrypted Data Disk is your best, as when you're using Singularity Blade, your melee hits whilst you have a Void buff will weaken, and as Soul Siphon gives Void Overshield, the second you get that Overshield on you, the melee will instantly start to weaken enemies. Plus, any melee kills will release a weakening burst. You pair this up with Power from Pain, which gives Devour on killing weakened enemies rapidly, and Void Infestation, which spawns weakening Seekers on killing weakened enemies, and now you've got Weaken and Devour in the kit for free. I don't think you should drop Starvation from the Nezarac build if you're using this artifact, but it's definitely nice to not just rely on orbs and breaches for Devour. That said, I also fully recognise that Hunter's Journal, MPA Repulsion Regulator and Tablet of Ruin, plus Apothecary Satchel, all have some really strong Void synergies, mainly revolving around Volatile, Weaken and Void Breaches. I'd say mess around a bit here, there's a lot of artifacts that do work well with the build. And that's that! I'm not spending too much time on this one, I really want to try get out as many builds as possible in as short a time as possible. So that is about it from me, see ya!